assembly or council of angels, but to know exactly where they rank in the angelic hierarchy. The scriptures speak many times of an assembly or council of angels, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. From heaven to earth, God's ethereal domain is apparently a very complex bureaucracy with various ranks, roles, and governing duties, and special terms for each, such as dominions, powers, principalities, and archangels. Though the Bible is rich with these descriptions, it lacks a clear rundown of the surprisingly intricate angelic hierarchy. Thankfully, angelologists are a dedicated bunch, and from the many little hints the scripture contains, it only took them a few centuries to figure it out. Since the birth of Christianity, the forefathers and thinkers of the church studied the hierarchy of angels relentlessly. And finally, in the 4th century AD, they joined forces for one final task: to establish a consistent classification, which they dubbed the 9 choirs of angels. Each of these 9 choirs can be thought of as a rank in the angelic hierarchy, and these ranks are organized based on those angels' proximity to God in heaven. And for the most part, this was meant as a literal measure of distance from his holy presence. But 9 choirs is quite a lot, and the number barely fits on 2 hands. So, in the 5th century AD, the Christian Neoplatonist Dionysius decided to simplify things. In his magnum opus, The Celestial Hierarchy, Dionysius explained, quote, "Theology has given to these celestial beings 9 interpretive names, and among these, our divine initiator distinguishes 3 threefold orders." End quote. These 3 threefold orders that neatly divide the 9 choirs are known as the 3 spheres of angels, a concept that heavily influenced the development of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, beginning with the first sphere, if you thought that angels like Michael and Gabriel would be the ones closest to God, well, the answer is not even close. The first sphere are the angels that see God directly and remain in his presence, and thus are thought to be his divine attendants. Dionysius writes, quote, "This is the first order of celestial beings which are established about God, immediately encircling him. And in perpetual purity they encompass his eternal knowledge in that most high and eternal angelic dance. They know preeminently many divine matters." End quote. Because of their proximity to God, these are the angels responsible for communicating his will to the angels of the lower 2nd and 3rd spheres. However, each of these choirs definitely play their own unique roles, and they each happen to be made up of a unique species of angel. Alright, so for the first choir of the first sphere, as we might expect, the first is also the closest to God, and these are the seraphim. Above all else, the seraphim are the dedicated worshippers of God, and their seemingly endless legions are depicted in constant, intense adoration and worship of his perfect holiness, flying around his chariot and throne and singing their praises day and night in a never-ending loop. The Bible makes sure to clarify that they never stop, by the way, not even for a second. In the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah describes his own hypnotizing encounter with these beings. Quote, "I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne. Above him were the seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory.' At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. 'Woe to me,' I cried. 'I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty.' Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand. With it he touched my mouth and said, 'See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for.' End quote. So from this, we're actually given several revealing details, and the first thing to point out is just how incredibly humble these creatures are. The seraphim use 4 of their 6 wings specifically to cover themselves in humility, hiding whatever radiance their appearance might have and making sure that all the glory in the room goes to God. This is the traditional belief, but some fringe theories argue that the seraphim are actually forced to cover themselves to avoid blinding or incinerating the human witnessing them. No person has ever seen what's under their wings, so we really don't know. Moving on, the act of touching a hot coal to Isaiah's mouth in order to atone for his sins shows one of the more unique duties of these creatures, that they're agents of cleansing, to assure that no one stands before God in an impure state. Like many other angelic beings, as we'll soon see, the seraphim have a very close association with fire. Not only did they handle hot coals and fill the temple with smoke, but their actual name seraphim is a Hebrew word that roughly translates to burning ones. And I really do mean a rough translation because in other parts of the Bible, the word seraphim, as well as its singular form seraph, are used not to describe an angel, oddly, but some kind of flying serpent. So the true meaning of this word remains an unsolved mystery, but considering the distinct yet deliberate uses of this word in the Bible, some scholars have argued that these may be intentional hints as to the seraph's true appearance. Think about it. All that we know about these angels' appearance is incredibly general. We know that they have a face, 6 wings, and an unspecified number of feet, and that's about it. While historical art might depict them as human-like, that's biblically inaccurate. But if we follow the actual trail of hints in the scripture, the seraphim of the first choir might arguably be described as fiery flying serpents, which, of course, are dragons. Moving on to the second choir, we've already had the pleasure of meeting these friends of Ezekiel. This rank is occupied by the cherubim, who are likely the most human-like angels in the third sphere. That should say a lot because, by definition, cherubim are chimeras, hybrid creatures composed of the body parts of different animals. Ezekiel described them as having 4 faces, that of a man, lion, ox, and eagle, as well as 4 wings and the feet of a calf, which implies that they're hooved. As for the 4 faces, from a symbolism standpoint, these have been interpreted in many convoluted ways, but the simplest answer is that the man represents humanity, the lion represents wild animals, the ox represents domestic animals, and the eagle represents birds. And birds in the Bible are often a symbol of far-seeing wisdom. On that note, the word cherub is actually a Hebrew term that translates to fullness of wisdom. Like the seraphim, the cherubim almost always remain in close proximity to God, whether he's sitting on his sapphire throne or riding his flaming chariot. So, what exactly do they do in his presence? Well, when Ezekiel saw these beings, they were the ones responsible for making the wheels of God's chariot move. Similarly, the second book of Samuel describes God as literally mounting the cherubim, flying through the sky and soaring on their wings. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that these creatures are like horses and his means of locomotion on Earth, and perhaps all throughout the universe. But without a doubt, the cherubim are known to play another role, and interestingly, some assigned to this role are forced to leave God's presence. In the book of Genesis, where after Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, God assigned a troop of cherubim to guard the garden's east side entrance and patrol the path leading to the Tree of Life. But considering that these beings are capable sentries and protectors, and most of them remain at their master's side, it seems very likely that the cherubim could also be God's personal guard, much like how a king requires nearby protection at all times. This is suggested by the fact that the books of Isaiah, Psalms, and 2 Kings all use a very specific phrase describing God as, quote, enthroned between the cherubim, End quote. Furthermore, metal sculptures of specifically cherubim and no other angel were used to decorate both King Solomon's temple and the Ark of the Covenant, with strong implications that their imagery provided some kind of protection. So while it's never explicitly stated, guard duty might actually be the primary role of the creatures of the second choir. But there is one often forgotten connection to make with the cherub, the most powerful testament that these beings are far more complex and capable than the scriptures describe. The same Ezekiel who first witnessed these creatures, 28 chapters later, went on to record the words delivered to him from God, words which recounted the origin of a certain biblical figure. Quote, "You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you, and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones." End quote. Some of you may recognize these infamous verses as the story of the angel Lucifer.